Hey friends, it's Laura with Laura B Floss Tube. This is my next video in our Christmas tree quilt. If you watched the first videos, you know that I am making a Christmas tree. It's an applique quilt, and I'm using a projector to project an image onto my design wall, and then I'll trace all the shapes, cut them out, add my fabrics, and voila, put it onto the background and I'm done, right? Sounds so easy peasy when I do it like that, but I'm pretty sure it's gonna take me a little longer than I have anticipated, and it might take me a little more work than I have truly thought out. But I think the end result is going to be amazing, and I hope that you are at least following the journey, and if you've decided to do something, definitely let me know. I know that a few people have commented that they're going to be trying this with maybe a smaller scale project to begin with, which I think is a great idea. And if you're crazy like me and you want to do a big project to begin with, I totally understand that too. So I am going to go over what I'm doing to trace my different shapes today. So I'm going to turn the projector back on, and we'll see the image here on the wall behind me. Hopefully I don't blind myself here. There we go. And so basically what I'm going to do is just use a Sharpie, and before you freak out, just let me finish. I'm going to use a Sharpie to trace all of my shapes on the tree. But when I'm doing that, I'm going to be very careful to trace them right outside the line where they are going to be the appropriate size. That way when I'm sewing them down, I'll cut inside the line, or I'll sew inside the line and cut most of that Sharpie off when I'm before I turn my shapes. So, without further ado, let me tell you what I have like here on the design wall, and we'll get started. Okay, so before I started this today, I hung 3 pieces of interfacing on my design wall, and I do realize that I'm going to have some waste like that, but I'm okay with it because interfacing is pretty cheap, and I'm not going to just toss it. I'll cut out my shapes and everything, and then I will save the extra pieces of interfacing for other projects that I do. Let me put this remote down. Okay, so the other thing that I want to point out is that there is a shadow over here. That's the table. Just ignore that. That's not part of my tree. And I do have some circles on the tree, and those I am going to use the circle rulers that are Lori Holt circle rulers. Let me see if you can see that. I have is that a 4-inch, I believe? Yep, a 4-inch and a 2-inch circle that I'm going to be using for some of the circles on the tree. The rest of it I'm just going to trace. Now you might also notice, if you look really closely, that over on this side of the design, some of these guys are hanging off. Well, I also have a few circles over here that are not projecting onto my interfacing, but I know they're there, and I'll just add them in onto the interfacing someplace else, and it'll be fine. All right. So this is going to be pretty simple. A few things that I've done beforehand. I did go ahead and make myself a little guide on a printout of the image, and it tells me what all the numbers for the pieces are. That's going to help us when we go to put it together. The other thing I've done is I have made myself a grid and kind of a cheat sheet over here on what I need. If you can see this, I have done I think it's 7 by 5, yep, 7 by 5 inch grid for my background squares, and those are all 10.5-inch squares that I've cut out of 3 different white, primarily white Christmas fabrics. And then I've also figured out the border that I'm going to put around the outside. It's going to have a thin red border, and then it's going to have a pieced border of just like those different fabrics again. And I do have all of those fabrics cut and stacked up over here. Yay! So I have all of my background stuff cut, and it is ready to go whenever I have time to sew it together. Let's talk about the background for a minute. I know I briefly went over that a little bit, but I think it may be a little confusing, so I just want to go into a little more depth about the background. So as I mentioned in the first video, I'm using 3 different background fabrics. I have some firework fabric and some reindeer, and then just a polka dot. So what I have done is with the graphic, I printed out to like a 5 by 7 size, and I put that on, I mapped it out in a grid. So basically my tree is going to be 50 by 70, And so I wanted to do a grid that was 5x7, and it worked out great to print the graphic out at 5x7 because then I just go 1 inch, and each inch is 10 inches on my background fabric for the quilt. So it gives me a really good scale to go with. The other thing I did was after I had it all gridded out, you can kind of see the red lines there. I have went through the tree and kind of marked out the sections that I'm going to sew together, or the background pieces, to put my applique pieces onto. Because I don't want to have to wrangle a 50x70 inch piece of fabric through my machine to applique all these shapes on. I want to kind of break it down into smaller portions and then sew them together as I go. So I didn't want any of my background fabrics to touch. So I didn't want polka dots next to polka dots or reindeer next to reindeer or whatever like that. So what I've done, you can kind of see, is I have made a little note on each corner that says what that fabric is going to be. So I either have reindeer, polka dots, or fireworks. So all of those are lettered all the way through this grid. And then I decided I'm going to do a kind of a narrow, it's like a 1 inch border around this tree out of red. And then the outside border is going to once again be those background fabrics cut at the 10.5 inch size to kind of go in with, to kind of tie in with the middle piece, except they're only going to be 5.5 inches wide. So to compensate for that 1 inch border, the ones up here on the top corners had to be 11.5 by 5.5 to compensate for this red border. Then I also have these squares here in the corners that are going to be the 5.5 inch squares. So I have all of that cut out, and you're going to see all my little chicken scratches over here that, you know, after I got them all labeled, I went back through and said, this is how many of the reindeer, the polka dot, and the fireworks that I need. These are the sizes I need. And now I have all of those pieces of fabric stacked up here and ready to go. Now, the next thing I'm going to do, since I have my interfacing traced, I am going to start laying out fabrics. And it's going to be kind of a quick and dirty type thing, I guess. But I'm going to start laying out those fabrics to decide where I want what greens, to get a good combination, to get a good variety of fabrics throughout my tree. So that's where we're at. Pretty fun and exciting. So like I said, the next step for me is going to be laying out those green fabrics for the tree, and then, you know, the red and the blue for the other, you know, other elements of the tree. And then I'm going to start sewing my background pieces together. So yeah, this is exciting times. All right, so I think the best course of action here is to trace everything, and then we'll go back and number everything. So I'm just going to get started, and I'm probably going to cut some of this out. I may have some bits of advice here and there that I'll leave in, but a lot of this I might cut off. So if you're seeing this video and you're like, whoa, how did she get half the tree done? Then you'll know it's because I cut some of that out, because I don't think you need to see me tracing shapes. So I'm just going to take my Sharpie and start tracing. So this circle I'm putting right here to take account for this one. That way I know that it is done. This is taking a little bit of time, but it's getting there. I do think that there's a few things that are probably going to change a little bit. There's definitely some shapes that are pretty close to one another that I'm going to have to move out somewhere else just so I have enough to cut around with the interfacing. But this is going to work out really good. I'm excited. Alright, so now I need to get the thing things that wouldn't fit on my space. So I know there's 2 more of these over here. So I'm just going to draw those in here. And then I know I have a few little circles here and there that I need to get in there as well. So I'm going to go ahead and draw these in. I do have a few pens on this, just because I knew I'd be tracing around on it. Didn't want a chance for it to fall down on me. So if you remember from one of my first videos for this quilt, I also said that when I have the little stars like this, I also need to get that centerpiece. So that's what I'm tracing right now. And I think I'm actually going to go ahead and trace it twice on this piece. Just so that part can be done. All right. Put this back up like this. And it looks to me like we have a tree that has been traced. The next step I'm going to do is use my printed pattern, and I'm going to go back to the shapes and I'm going to number them based on what their number is on the sheet. So once I get all that done, I will take the interfacing down and start cutting out the shapes. Now I do have a few shapes where they overlap the interfacing strips, so what I will do is I'll number both of them, and then I'll have the matching points, and I will just, sew them, probably sew that little piece of interfacing together before I cut my fabric out, just so it's not quite as cumbersome to work with. So yeah, this is coming together nicely. I'm so excited. Thanks so much for watching. I hope that you picked up a tip or trick or two. I hope that this wasn't completely boring just to watch me tracing some shapes. I am going to go ahead and number some of these, and then I will wrap it up. But hey, until next time, happy stitching.